Like most verticals these days, real estate is very much a data-driven industry. And probably the most important single data point is square footage. Why? Because when determining how much a home is worth, we typically start with the square footage and then apply some metric to that number. So square footage is essentially the foundation upon which we base all valuation calculations. So it's kind of a big deal. Whenever I'm working with a buyer and they find a home they're thinking about buying, I always do research on that property. And typically, the first thing I do is double-check the square footage. This is done by comparing the square footage detailed in the MLS listing with the square footage that appears in several other sources, including public data records and other websites that contain similar property-specific data. Recently, when working with a high-net-worth buyer, I was going through that process, and I discovered not one but two instances in which the square footage of a home was significantly overstated. Without giving away too much information, one discrepancy I found was absolutely massive. Per my calculation, the square footage was overstated by 4,426 square feet, or 67%. Yes, you heard that right. The square footage appeared to be overstated by 4,426 square feet. To be sure I hadn't missed something, I reached out to the listing agent and laid out the findings of my research, including links to the various sources where I obtained my information, and specifically asked for the source of her square footage. At first, she ignored me. When I followed up a second time, she dodged the question. When I followed up a third time, she ignored me for 3 weeks, and then finally sent me something that had no actual square footage calculations. The discrepancy on the other home was smaller, but still significant. I followed up with that agent 3 times, got the runaround, and just gave up. You have to understand this is a critical piece of information, and in real estate, we're never supposed to publish square footage without having a concrete, generally accepted source for that data. It's also important to understand that the number one source of litigation in residential real estate is disclosure disputes, and the number one disclosure issue is misstated square footage. In the end, I obviously advised my client to avoid both of these properties based on the listing agent's responses to my perfectly reasonable and legitimate questions. The obvious point? Never ever buy a home without double-checking the square footage. Have questions about square footage or anything else involving real estate, please don't hesitate to contact me, Professional One Broker owner Michael McClure, CPA, today. I love helping people, and I'd love to help you with your next real estate purchase or sale.